For those of you who don't know me, I'm Charlie. I run Fluency Communications. We are basically a reasonably new ISP. We're based in Edinburgh. We started out just doing voice over IP services and very quickly ended up, not for any fault of our own, ended up building an access network. We're a business ISP, we're not domestic, we just serve businesses in Scotland primarily. If you're local, you might not have heard of us, but you might have heard of CommsWorld. CommsWorld acquired us last year. CommsWorld is a big managed services company, again with a big telecoms base. They bought us last year because of our network assets and because we seem to know what we're doing. So together we're doing all sorts of exciting things. One of a background here is we don't do hosting, we don't do collocation, we're not a data center operator. We just concentrate on network services, basically access and voice. We are a typical consumer of data centers though. We operate a network, we have servers, they sit in a rack. We also have a lot of customers. CommsWorld have a customer base of 3,000 customers who many of them use data centers themselves. These guys have all asked us at some time or another to help them deal with their data center operator. So we've got good relationships with a lot of them. And as a result of all of that, that's why I was asked today to do this presentation, because we're sort of impartial. We can say we're not a data center operator, we don't have an agenda. We specifically say that we're data center agnostic, and we are happy and encourage carrier neutral sort of credentials and all the rest of it. Now, doing a presentation on Scottish data center scene, you think there's probably not much to it, but you know, as was said, there's actually more than you'd think. So don't switch off straight away. Format of this is basically, I'm just going to tell you a story about how we got set up, which sort of explains a very typical scenario for where an ISP might have come from. You know, we were a startup a few years ago with various challenges, and it was an interesting perceived environment for someone who didn't know an awful lot about the industry. We very quickly learnt about the Scottish market, and I'll take you on that journey. So when we started up, we had a quarter rack, little quarter rack sitting in Pulseon's data center in Newbridge. We bung a couple of little Dell servers in there. We had a hosted VoIP operation, and we had a second-hand Cisco router. And that's how we started up. We very quickly grew out of that, but actually the biggest challenge, with no disrespect to Pulseon, but you know, they were the only basically the only operator that you could easily buy connectivity from in the data center. And we had issues, you know, that we needed to resolve. We naturally always wanted to grow and do more things and connect to other people. We wanted to partner with wholesalers in Manchester and London and all over the world. And being in a sort of environment that we were in, that was quite difficult without spending lots of money. Don't get me wrong, Pulseon is, by the way, carrier neutral, but the carriers that are in that data center particularly were guys like BT who charge a fortune for a small circuit, the type of thing that we might look for. So we had this problem with flexibility, and we thought, right, well, what do we do? How do we resolve that? And this is how a lot of ISPs get started. They go, well, you know, we're hosting our stuff in someone else's data center. We're on their IP addresses. How do we move away from that? So ultimately, we had to go to RIPE in Amsterdam. We knock on their door and say, guys, we need an AS number, and we want some IP addresses. We want to be autonomous. We want to be multi-homed. We want to be, you know, masters of our own destiny somewhat. So that's straightforward enough. You end up with this sort of arrangement. You know, we're sitting in a data center in Edinburgh, and we get a connection from 2 carriers rather than 1. And we're somewhat autonomous. If one carrier has a problem, we can switch to another. So, you know, the question goes, well, great. You know, who's carrier neutral around here? Who can we go, which data center can we go into that has more than 1 transit provider in the room? Now, I sort of turn the analogy to, the market's quite vibrant in Scotland, or you would have thought. This should be like asking your pal where the nearest chippy is, where's a good chippy around here? And the answer to that is, well, my local around the corner. But actually, it's a bit more awkward because there's plenty of data centers around, but we're asking who's carrier neutral. So it's like going to find a chippy that sells mushy peas. You're sort of going, well, who sells mushy peas? And in Scotland, nobody sells mushy peas. It's this sort of really annoying thing. You can't go into a chippy and get mushy peas. It's, crazy. So, there's one or two. And in Scotland, there is one obvious answer, which you probably all know. If you know Edinburgh, there's a data center called collocation. Again, just bought by Pulseon recently. And that's carrier neutral. It's got some really good carrier neutral credentials. But, the answer, let's go to them just because they're the only carrier neutral guys in town, is a bit of a crap answer, isn't it? Why should we do that? Let's sort of go out and see what else is there. That process for us was very short. We found ourselves sort of at a dead end. Well, there's no one else really easily accessible. We can't really see anyone on our doorstep who's offering these services to us, so we'll just stick our kit in collocation. So that's what we did. And the problem with that, so we ended up with something like that in collocation, and the problem was, we ended up with 2 providers giving us transit, and that was good, but we were still at the mercy of them. We still didn't have the environment in Scotland that we needed to go off and buy services from other people. We wanted to deal with voice wholesalers. We wanted to go to the, Gammas of this world. We wanted to go to the, BT sort of level of things. And that was really difficult. And we also found that the connectivity that we were buying from various transit providers still was just backhauled from London. So we were sort of in this environment where your typical 14 millisecond backhaul from London via a third-party provider that you have no control of. And much like Andrew said earlier, the way of resolving that problem is, well, ultimately you have to go and stick a bit of kit in London yourself. And that's what we did. We were sort of frustrated with the scenario that we had, and so we went and got some collocation in Telehouse East, and we stuck some routers in there, got our own backhaul to Edinburgh, and we'd sort of solved our problem. We had access to various people in the same data center. We had all sorts of things that we didn't have before, and we had a reasonably good link back up to Scotland, or as good as can cheaply be bought. And this sort of setup worked really well for us. It served its purpose. But it always bothered me a little bit. So what we ended up with in London was, we joined an internet exchange. We happened to have joined LONAP. They were actually a wee bit cheaper than LINX, so startup ISP at the time, that was the sensible choice. And we peered with all the guys that we wanted to, all the guys that we were seeing a lot of traffic back and forth from, Google, Akamai, BBC, all that sort of stuff. But the really crucial thing was it gave us a lot of reliability and control. We had good transit providers in Telehouse. We had good peering. If we had a problem and it was something that was on LONAP or it was something that was with one of our transit providers, we had a really easy level of control. We could just switch them off, or we could phone them up and reroute them. It was a really, really vibrant market for us, and something that we lacked in Scotland. Something that also allowed a shift for us in terms of the business that we started doing was we had people on the doorstep in Telehouse who could provide us with access circuits, layer 2 access, Ethernet access. The guys like TalkTalk and Enta and Griffin and all these sorts of guys who wholesale Ethernet access across the country. We could buy that because it was on our doorstep in Telehouse. We could just run a cable across the data center, plug into their network, and start selling EFM, Ethernet, all these sorts of things across the country. And that, again, shifted the business model that we had because we were in an environment that had that on the doorstep. So that was all fine. And like I say, it served us very well. However, we're in Edinburgh. Does anyone spot the problem with the slide? It really bothers me that, you know, we're a Scottish indigenous company, but we couldn't find the environment that we needed to trade in Scotland. It bothered us even more. You know, anyone that knows me, I have vehement hatred of latency. 14 milliseconds to me is far too much. I shudder if I ever have to work in America. You know, the sort of latencies that you see, Martin, across the States would just fill me with dread. But 14 milliseconds is a pain in the arse as far as I'm concerned. And when we're buying layer 2 access off companies that are in London, the customers in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, wherever they are, and a lot of the kit that they might be terminating on will probably be in Scotland as well. So we're not talking about just an internet breakout where the customer's traffic goes down to London, it might be 14 milliseconds or something to that effect, and then go onto the internet. We're talking about double that, because the round trip time has to go to London, where it hits our Ethernet aggregators network, and then back up again to whatever kit is sitting in Scotland that they're trying to access. So the problems sort of double because there's not this market for access providers in Scotland. So when we were bought by CommsWorld last year, I had long discussions with the guys and said, you know, we've got an opportunity to change this, or at least change it for our own customers. And so we decided to build our own access network across Scotland. Now this sort of takes me on to data centers. It does come round again, I promise. We went and decided, right, well, we're going to build a network. We're going to start building a network across and up Scotland, pretty much anywhere that we've got a good density of customers. And that sort of started again with our journey, talking to all these data centers, and started to speak to them all and go, well, who are you? What have you got? Where are you? What sort of connectivity do you have? And actually, it completely realigned what I thought about the Scottish data center scene, because it really encouraged me. So, the not-so-grand tour. There's not that many data centers in Scotland, but there's more than you'd think, and they're a lot better than you think. Some of the companies that run data centers, I mean, they're all probably in the room, I think minus one or two. There's representatives from most of these guys, so apologies if I've got any information wrong. And thanks again for providing all the information you did. But the main thing to take away with all of this is the data center operators in Scotland are exceptionally good. We have dealt with an awful lot of them. We have had horror stories from various ones down south, various ones around the world. And from hearing those stories and dealing with those data centers that we have, the ones in Scotland are exceptional. And the companies, as a lot of people enjoy working in Scotland, you know, the environment is very good and business is very easy to take place. I find that a lot of the guys that run these data centers are really good to work with. So we'll start at the top. Unfortunately, there's nothing in Inverness. There really probably should be, but there isn't. One thing to mention is that SSE, Scottish and Southern, who have an epic fibre network across the whole country, specifically in Scotland, they do have collocation facilities in various cities, but Inverness is one of them. They have a not quite carrier neutral collocation facility, which they've got various ones. They've got Dundee, Aberdeen. They've got one actually in the Harriet Watt Business Park, and I believe they've got one in Glasgow somewhere as well. That doesn't necessarily mean, you know, if you're building a network, certainly SSE are one of the people that we go and talk to regularly about any network plans that we have, and it's worth considering them. They don't offer massive amounts of rack space, but they do have key sort of hubs. The next sort of obvious place to go, and there's good reasons to go, is Aberdeen. The first data center that we sort of came across there was run by the Amor Group. Now, Amor specialize in, you know, they're quite unknown in the industry to a lot of LINX members have probably not heard of, or not probably dealt with them in very many capacities, if at all, because they specialize in energy, transport, you know, public services, things like that. Big company, very well respected. They have a reasonably small data center it's sort of 2,100 square feet. It's a few hundred, I think 100 racks or so. It's got very good power and all the rest of it, but they boast themselves as being the place to be for public services. They're connected to the NHSN3 network directly. They are sort of they would say they're definitely carrier neutral. Unfortunately, the only people who have fiber into their building is BT and Cable and Wireless. That is something that we see a lot of in Scotland with various people, is they're all happy and we're carrier neutral, we'll let you run a connection into our data center from anywhere to anywhere, whatever. The disappointing thing is that a lot of the guys who have fiber around or nearby in that city don't necessarily look at the data centers to take it there, and that's a shame. These guys, some of their credentials are on screen, some of their credentials, VESDA detection and all sorts of other things. They have a very good and very responsive team of guys who helped me with all of this. I can give you their details. If anyone is doing business in Aberdeen and has interest in more, let me know. I don't believe anyone from Amora is in the room, no. The next one, and we're graced with Graham's presence, IFB. Now, IFB, Graham, you'll maybe need to, anyone who has questions, please fire them to Graham. IFB have a facility at the moment in Union Street, I believe, but they're in the process of building this new one, which is seemingly epic from that drawing. It's well equipped with power and all the rest of it. Something that I was very excited to hear is that SSE have brought their fibre into the building. So well done, Graham. You managed to persuade them to drag a cable across the town.
It was old money. It was nothing.
There's this is sort of, am I right in saying nearly ready?
Nearly ready.
Good, right.
Taking orders now.
Taking orders now. So doing some cool stuff with free air, heat and recapture cooling. They're reasonably carrier neutral. Yeah, well, sort of, The one thing to mention about most of these data centers is they all do operate networks of their own, and they're all pretty much excellent. I know Graham has fantastic connections back to Edinburgh and London. All the other ones that I'll mention have very similar sort of setups. They've all taken their networks very seriously. If you're not an ISP and you're not necessarily looking to peer with people and buy transit and do BGP and all of these things, I'm sure a lot of these operators would let you do that. But if you want to be multi-homed, that's maybe something you need to look a bit more carrier neutral for. Having said that, these are all exceptionally well-equipped data centers, and if your requirement is just hosting and you're willing to trust that their network is good, which it is, these guys are more than equipped to deal with that. The next one down is Dundee. So BrightSolid used to be called Scotland Online. Again, I think we've got 2 or 3 of the guys from BrightSolid in the crowd. Neil, if you could make yourself known. Neil helped me thanks very much for your help with all of this. Reasonably big data center for Scotland. There's, they scale, but BrightSolid's pretty well equipped. It was built with IBM, so IBM helped the guys build that. For not entirely clear on the reason, but I'm assuming there was some sort of business arrangement there. Really good looking in terms of all the specs. BrightSolid have all the ISOs that you could possibly count. They've also paid attention to things that some other guys don't bother with, which is sort of environmental risk mitigation, making sure that all sorts of wind and flooding and all sorts of things like that don't affect business. Again, semi-carrier neutral. There's various operators on site, but they do operate their own network, and there's a preference towards taking that. But I don't believe it's a big issue if you want to bring in your own connections from elsewhere. Again, various credentials, all the ticks in all the boxes in terms of that stuff. No VEC fire detection and suppression, which I've never heard of, but having read up on it, sounds pretty smart. Next on to Onyx. Onyx are a big managed services company. Many people in Scotland know them. They do have a couple of data centres, one in Glasgow and one in Edinburgh. Glasgow is the smaller one of the two. It's reasonably big in size, but I don't believe has that amount fitted out at the moment. It's got plenty of power, and I think they're in the process of upgrading it. Where's Simon? Right. Simon, hi. Right. So Glasgow's being upgraded at the moment, is that right?
Some extra space is being done.
Great. So it's on the growth. There's very few data centres in Glasgow. I'll come on to another one in a second, but for Scotland's biggest city, you'd actually sort of expect there to be more. I'll come on to some notable exceptions at the end. I'm going through the sort of publicly accessible data centres here. Again, Onyx's network's pretty decent. Got better connections across Scotland than many because they've got 2 data centres in Edinburgh and Glasgow. They're also all the ISO accredited, all those sorts of good things. The carrier neutral credentials are a little bit lacking, but I'm not here to judge. There's plenty of fibre operators in the building, but I believe it's a sort of special request type effort if you do want to take connectivity from any of those. Next is IOMART. Now, IOMART is a fantastically well-equipped data centre in Glasgow. We've actually just taken some space in there. The data centre's in 2 halves. There's two sections. One's fitted out at the moment. One's being fitted out. It's pretty well-equipped. The biggest thing that IOMART have is that, aside from Scolocate, they are the best carrier-neutral data centre in Scotland. They have, while Scolocate has dozens of different carriers and everyone else has 1 or 2, IOMART have guys like Geo who have provided their 10 gig, their new 10 gig network around the country. So Geo are on site, which is quite interesting. But also there's guys like Level 3 and Cogent who are your sort of typical tier 1 type sort of guys to go to for long haul circuits. And they've all got their own fibre in the building, and that's significant because these guys can provide, much cheaper than and much better than the likes of BT Wholesale or anyone else that you might have to go to get a long MPLS connection into one of these other data centres. These guys can provide optical. They've got very cool sort of setup in terms of the rack fit out. Everything's provided for you and it's all monitored online and everything. If you have any questions at all, Hannah, very, very helpful. She'll sort you out with anything you need. We've had an absolutely fantastic experience with IOMART. The data center that is closest to my heart, because this is where we started at, is Pulseon's data center in Newbridge. Pulseon, you may know as Lumison. You may also know them as Ednet if you're from Edinburgh. You may also know them as Blue Square or Dedi Power because they now all merged together. Pulseon's the new name for the conglomerate. Pulseon built this data center in 2004. It's really well equipped. They've got plenty of space. They've also got a DR facility upstairs, which is quite nice. They also have their NOC. The main sort of northern technical staff of Pulseon which many of the guys are in the crowd, they're based sort of in the building, which is really handy. The size of the generators scare me. I know most data centers seem to hide them somewhere, but at Newbridge you can go and see them, and they're quite worrying, especially when they're on. It's all well equipped. The carriers on there are BT, Virgin, and Cable and Wireless. However, since Pulseon have acquired Scolocate, and Newbridge is only a few miles from South Gyle, where Scolocate is, they've committed to running a 10 gig service between the two data centers. So if you're in Scolocate or you're in Newbridge, you can easily and hopefully reasonably cheaply get access to the other. Now, I don't know quite what power use efficiency is, but apparently they boast power use efficiency of 1.6. If someone can tell me what that means, that'd be great. they have a really capable NOC, 24/7 manned, all the rest of it. And one of the coolest things about the data center is that you can get in yourself anytime without an access request. They've got an access control card system, which many data centers tend to ask for access. Some people would see that as better or worse, more secure, less secure. I personally prefer just being able to turn up whatever you want. If anyone has any questions, Steve and Gavin are both here. Steve also come up from down south to join us. Anyone has any questions about any of the Pulseon services, speak to Steve and Gavin. I will skip to the next Pulseon data center just to tell you about Onyx's data center in Edinburgh. This is the second last one, I promise. This is the sort of second biggest data center in Scotland, actually. Onyx is, they've chucked a shed load of money into this place, and I didn't even know it existed, which was quite surprising. But it's right next to Scolocate. It's in the Gyle of Edinburgh, in the sort of industrial side of Edinburgh. It's pretty massive. Again, not entirely carrier neutral. They do have various providers on site, and it would be a sort of special request if you did want to access it. Again, Onyx are a managed services company, so actually their focus is not necessarily catering to ISPs and people like that who might peer on an exchange, but their kit, hopefully, if they were to join a future exchange, that data center would be quite closely connected to it, because it's a few hundred yards away from others. Again, Onyx are very well accredited, all the ISOs, and again, ask Simon if you have any questions about Edinburgh. Finally, we come to the biggie. Scolocate is right next to Onyx's data center in the Gyle. It was opened by RBS in 1999 and purchased this year by Pulseon. The whole campus has a bit more to it. Guys like Andrew's company, Extraordinary, are based on the campus, and there's other guys sort of similarly located closely. The data center is split up into 3 phases, confusingly called phase 2, 3, and 4. Phase 2 is the carrier suite, so that's where we've got, that's where we are. Other ISPs seem to connect together in there. They've got a sort of main colo suite, which is the bigger unit, and that's phase 3. And I believe there's a private customer in phase 4. Is that right? Where's John? Has John left? No. So the credentials for Scolocate are, again, epic. They've managed to get 2 primary 3 megawatt feeds into the place. So I wish there was some wood to touch, but the power, since we've been in there, hasn't had a blip. And I haven't heard too many stories of it ever having a blip. The phase 4 unit, which has recently been fitted out, uses some really cool stuff using air flooding and ceiling return sort of rack chimney stacks to do the cooling, which I'm yet to see, but looks really exciting. And again, they've got the 10 gig link over to the Newbridge data center, so anyone who's in Newbridge can easily access it. The biggest and most important thing about Scolocate is that it's got 14 different fiber operators in the building, 14 that I could count. There's probably more because of various networks that were aggregated, having been bought and sold. Cable and Wireless mopped up a handful of them. Various other peoples did similarly. There are more than 30 carriers who can provide connectivity, who are based on those fibers. So there's a vibrant market for transit and for people to buy some connectivity from your bigger guys like BT and Virgin and all that sort of stuff across the data floor. The disappointing things, that there's not very many of the southern providers in Scolocate yet. We're bending their arms at the moment. We're trying to make them come up. Guys like TalkTalk, guys like Enta, who have a network in Scotland but don't really have a network in Scotland. People like that who very much base their network in the south. we want to try and persuade them to bring it up. Of course, we're building our own network that will be primarily based in the central belt of Scotland, so we'll be added to that list soon. Now, again, I thought John was here. John's worked for Colocate for a long time before Pulseon bought them out, but in the absence of John being here, again, ask Steve if you've got any inquiries about Colocate. The guys at Pulseon are really, really cooperative. I had a long call with Aiden, who's the COO, the other day about the project of starting an exchange. I didn't want to put any words in anyone's mouths and suggest anything, but the obvious thing that's going to come out here is that the sensible place to put an exchange, or at least start an exchange, would be Colocate, secondarily being IOMART in Glasgow. Having said that, there needs to be a discussion about that. I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth. And I'm absolutely positive that when that discussion happens, the guys at Pulseon will be more than cooperative. So, there's not that many there, but I hope, unless I've missed anything massive, that should be reasonably good. I was kind of hoping to gauge from the audience whether anyone here could tell me any different, because I did a reasonably good job of hunting around for unknown data centers, but I may be wrong. The big ones that are missing are obviously the BT data centers that you can, technically they're public data centers. You could go to BT, knock on their door and say, I need to collocate some equipment, and they'll probably take you down the back of a telephone exchange somewhere and call it a data center. I might be wrong. I think there is one or two big facilities that they have in Glasgow and places like that. SSE's various colo places are very handy little points of presence, not necessarily sort of massive amounts of racks. They were part of the Atlas project, which some of you may know about. Business parks around Scotland that were all linked together, and SSE bought the fibre assets of that project and now operate the colo facilities. So to come to some sort of conclusions, the data centre industry in Scotland is not as good as it could be. It's better than we thought it would be. Some reasons for that is that Scotland's cold. It's a sensible place to build data centers. It's cheaper to use the air outside to cool your servers than start up big air conditioning units. We have loads of power and renewables and generation on our doorstep. So another great reason for data centers to come to Scotland. We're kind of missing a telehouse or telecity type guy. Pulseon are making a good effort at becoming that guy, but don't think we're quite there yet. I'm hoping at some stage that the Scottish economy will evolve to a point where it's not just the big banks and guys like that that are building proper big data centers. I'm hoping at some stage the market will evolve to a point where guys like Telehouse and Telecity and Interaction and Equinix and all these guys who have a good base down south will start to look at Scotland for the reasons I've mentioned. One of the commentaries that I'd like to offer is that it would certainly help Scotland if some of these data center operators who have great data centers were a bit more carrier neutral, but that's your prerogative, and we'll not bend your arm too hard. The reason for that really is because if we do end up with a decent internet exchange in Scotland, it will start to bring more people. It will start opening people's eyes to the market that's available here. And the only way that these data centers will be able to participate in an internet exchange is if they're going to be carrier neutral. So, basically, if you want to get involved, get carrier neutral. This slide looks horrendous. I apologize. That's our logo. Kind of went a bit wrong. We are sponsoring the drinks afterwards, so everyone have a beer on us. Thanks very much.